Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I have another Diablo 4 build guide for you guys, and it is more of an update. It is a build that you guys can use right away in Season 1 if you want, but I think it really has some nuances about what the future might hold for Sorcerer. Now, SORC is the class that I started playing Diablo 4 with, but we encountered a lot of issues with the fact that there were a lot of bugs in the game, and a lot of the mechanics kind of worked against damage over time builds. It really worked for crit builds. And there were a lot of things that didn't work, like the combustion key node apparently didn't do anything until after I hit level 100 on a Firewall SORC as my first level 100 in Diablo 4. The other major thing is that the game was kind of balanced around having tons of armor, and SORC just couldn't really get any extra. And SORC got a lot of extra resists, but resists, as I have talked about in the past, they don't really do anything in the 4th difficulty because each instance of resistance has the penalty of the difficulty applied, making it nearly impossible to get elemental mitigation from resistances anywhere near what you might be able to get from armor, because armor applies to half of the elemental damage taken and all of the physical damage taken. So it was a real mess, but the future is bright. The future is bright because we have been told by Blizzard that they will address resistances in Season 2, which is the next season, comes after 1. And in the meantime, they have given SORCs a lot of buffs and a lot of tools defensively, to where I feel like right now, if they had resistances just increased a little bit, SORCs might actually be one of the tankiest classes in the game once again. It's kind of come full circle to the beta. So today I want to give you guys, on Mobalytics, of course, KRIPP'S Firewall SORC. This is very similar to the build that I first leveled to 100 with, but the build is now significantly stronger, and I want to go over the number of things that have changed in that time. And I expect that the build will be even stronger still. Before we get into that, let's first talk about Season 1. So Season 1 introduced these malignant hearts, and the best heart by an enormous margin is the Barber heart, which activates when you activate a crit. It is so much the best heart, it would multiple times buff your damage. Now we're using one that's still pretty good. Damage over time, have a multiplier. Staggered bosses, unstoppable monsters, they get a huge multiplier, so it's still pretty good. But they have said that these hearts will not still be in the game after Season 1. So if we take the Barber away from everyone, the Firewall build specifically is going to gain major ground. I feel that Firewall SORC might actually be one of the strongest SORC builds in the future of Diablo 4, and I really enjoyed the playstyle. So if you want to kind of, get your feet wet and see what the build is like, the build is on Mobalytics for you guys. All KRIPP builds are on Mobalytics. If you want to check out this one, please use the link in the description for this written guide. Alright, so what are we using? Well, we're using all 4 defensive skills, Firewall, and Inferno. They actually buffed Deep Freeze to completely reset your cooldown, so I would still consider Deep Freeze, but after playing a few SORCs since using it, I have to say that Inferno is pretty sweet. So I think it's still a playstyle choice, but you can use the other Deep Freeze ultimate if you choose. Firewall is a crazy multiplier to your damage if you use it as an enchantment. It makes it so if you have a large stack of mobs, you're going to get just an enormous stack of firewalls on it. Now, there is a lot of debate as to the second enchantment, what is the best one to use, The reason I like Meteor is actually because of the delayed damage. When I group up like a ton of monsters, which I do with the unique chest ability Raiment of the Infinite, Teleport pulls them in. It groups up, let's say, 20 crappy monsters and 3 rares. Now, the rares are going to have way more health than the crappy monsters. And the Firewall, when it first starts going down, we teleport, then we Firewall. It's going to do like almost no damage. It's not going to do that much damage. But that Firewall is going to tick on every single monster. It's going to proc a whole bunch more Firewalls. And it's going to proc Meteors. Now, those Meteors are not going to come down immediately, but those monsters are still stunned in place. So while the crappy monsters are dying, all these Firewall procs and Meteor procs are on the way, and they will just about always finish off the rares. So it is a pretty interesting gameplay loop. It might seem a little bit delayed, but the more you play and practice this build, you'll kind of gain mastery over the pacing of it, which will actually let you realize that the build isn't really slow at all if you have a really good understanding about what it takes to kill certain mob packs and mob types. Quick guide over the aspects. Disobedience was nerfed. Armor is a lot lower. That's unfortunate for SORC, which didn't have too much to begin with, but we have a lot more damage reduction tools thanks to Blizzard buffing SORCs. Edge Masters is a pretty weak aspect, but whatever. You have a few other options if you choose. We use Ever Living for defense. If we have vulnerable or crowd control enemies, they do less damage to us. Exploiters, 20% increased crowd control duration. I really like that. Crowd control duration is extremely powerful, especially if we use smiting, which is a 40% crowd control duration multiplier. I can almost instantly stagger bosses with Teleport and Frost Nova with this build, and it is just so satisfying to see that happen. We have to use a wand because we have to use an offhand for the cooldown reduction that it can provide. Damage while barrier, yes, it works. Increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have barrier. This was buffed from 20 to 30, so that's very nice. Aspect of Control, 35, and the Amulet, we get a bonus. Prodigy is your main source of mana recovery. And we use Amethyst, damage over time, doesn't really add a lot of stuff. Rubies for percent life. Barriers were changed in a recent patch, so while the barrier cap is still based on your base life, when a barrier is applied, is it a percentage of your maximum life? So getting higher life on a SORC is so big now compared to prior to this change. We use Spell Breaking for defense, we use Revenge for defense, and Creeping Death adds quite a lot of damage if you have that. Firebolt, we don't really use that. Now let's talk about the buffs. Elemental Dominance now also includes Mastery skills. So we are using a Mastery skill. We're using Firewall, so we just gained 9% damage. That's not too bad. We gain massive survivability boosts in the last few patches on SORC, and whenever resists get addressed, we're going to get another massive survivability boost. I feel that Fire is by far the tankiest SORC, and this will especially be true when resistances are addressed, because the largest source of resistance is actually your total int. The more int you have, the more you have of that one giant instance of all resist, because resists kind of function on the remainder. But if you have an enormous amount of int, and for a Firewall or damage over time playstyle, we actually have a huge incentive to stack int. So that's going to be a really big thing as well. Max Nova, Max Teleport. Align the Elements was buffed. Stacks much faster now. Huge uptime on that. Mana Shield received a sizable buff as well. Protection received a massive buff with the change to barriers overall. SORC was one of the most consistent barrier appliers using protection and constant cycling of defensive skills. And this was also buffed. I think it was 2 seconds last patch, and now it's 3 seconds, so we don't need quite as many duration points, but you can adjust those if you want. We use the Meteor largely for Immobilize. We get the Stun from Teleport. We get the Freeze from Nova, and we get the Immobilize from Meteor. So we can get all three aspects of controls, and that is on a consistent basis when we're clearing an instance. That never changed. 5 points in Firewall. Inferno or Deep Freeze, your choice. Give them both a try. Right now in Diablo, it's all about trying and having fun. Fiery Surge, 1 point. I don't think it's really worth the mana, but it's there. Endless Pyre and Warmth will constantly heal you, especially now with the improvements to Barrier. A big one, Combustion. So when I first leveled this character, I actually went with Shatter after a while. It seemed to help a little bit, but wasn't huge. Apparently at the time, Combustion was literally doing nothing. Now, after that, they have fixed it, so Combustion actually increases your damage from burning effects. And in a more recent patch, they also added a separate 20% multiplier to it. So this build, between all the different buffs just from the skill tree, and the fact that defenses were buffed to a point where you can now spec Glass Cannon, we're talking about minimum doubling the damage from when I first played this character. But wait, there's more. So, we use Adept here. It doesn't provide much except the base bonus, 20% area. I always leave a few points, and honestly, if you want to take away some of the int points from Adept, you can do that, but int is really valuable for SORC because of Burning Instinct. Burning Instinct makes it so critical damage gives you burning damage, but it's not converted, it's in addition to. That means that your Meteor, the impact can still crit and do a lot of crit damage because you have a lot of crit damage. This was also changed to include your base crit multiplier, which was 50. They did nerf crit multiplier on gear, but they didn't nerf it on the Paragon tree, so we get a little bit of that, which is pretty nice. But because we got the base crit multiplier, it actually kind of netted out about the same. They nerfed just about every single build with Season 1 launch, but this one took it fairly lightly and also got buffed significantly. So we're going to get lots of int, and we're going to get lots of crit damage, and Burning Instinct is going to provide an enormous amount of flat damage, the burning damage. We're using Destruction Glyph now. You might be thinking, what? Well, critical strike damage from the Destruction Glyph now applies to your character sheet. And because it does that, it now works with Burning Instinct, making it one of the very best glyphs in the game. Now, we're not really doing too many crits with the rest of our character, so the secondary bonus, which is up to 12% multiplier, I would say you're not getting maximum use out of that, but you might. There's a lot of things that can crit, like the meteors, like your teleport, for example. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 10 seconds can be a long time, so it can stack up a little bit. We use Exploit, of course. They did kind of nerf the scaling on Exploit a little bit, so you can get the dexterity points if you want, but I don't think it's that necessary. I really like getting Enchantment. It's not a popular choice, but you know what? I think it really works. I think it's still a pretty underrated one, at least if you use Meteor and Firewall. There's some enchantments, like some builds use Ice Shards. Ice Shards wouldn't scale from the enchantment, so you'd want a completely different Paragon tree for that. Tactician, not too bad. Damage when you use a defensive skill. And I have Glyph of Control here. And we're getting just some of the crit damage on the tree, which was not nerfed. And they actually buffed, I think, every single major node with damage reduction from burning. And because this specific build got literally all of them, that is also another major survivability boost. Overall, it's never been better to play a Firewall SORC, and I know a lot of you guys looked at it and checked out the stream when I was first playing Diablo 4, playing my Firewall SORC. Well, it's a lot stronger, and I would say that the future for this build in particular is looking brighter than ever. Hope you enjoyed the guide, and we'll see you next time.